So good evening everyone. Welcome to the MLA Sheep Productivity and Profitability webinar series. Tonight's presenter is Sandy McEachern, Director and Consultant at Holmes Sackett. My name is Hilary Beach. I'm also from Holmes Sackett, and tonight I'll be filling in for David Brown. So tonight's webinar, Sandy will address the proposed changes to the definition of lamb and the implications to lamb producers. So on the control panel to your right of screen, you'll be able to see a red sort of button at the top right of this control panel. This collapses and reinstates this control panel just in case it's covering the slides that may be on your screen. So you should be able to hear us, but we can't hear you. The question box, a part of this control panel, is where we would like you to put your questions for Sandy as he goes through his presentation. He'll be able to get to them and address them at the end. So tonight's presenter, as I said, is Sandy McEachern. Sandy is a director and consultant at Holmes Sackett. Sandy's area of expertise is ongoing management advice to mixed farming clients, specifically timing of management events, stocking rates, animal health, capital allocation, and improvement of livestock pastures and infrastructure. Sandy is often involved in strategic reviews of farm performance, farm business plans, and management systems. Recently, Sandy has been engaged by MLA to review the current and proposed definition of lamb, provide strategic advice and report his findings to MLA and the wider industry. We are very lucky to hear from this important information from someone as experienced and close to the action as Sandy, and we are very much looking forward to listening in tonight. So welcome Sandy and everyone to the webinar, and if you're ready Sandy, please take it away.
Okay, thank you Hilary, and welcome to the webinar everyone who's attending. The background to Holmes Sackett involvement in this issue started in 2008 when a review was held into the possible changing of the definition of lamb in Australia, and at that time there was significant amounts of eating quality work going on, and there was work done on the implications, the economic implications that this might have to the industry. Subsequent to that, the process got stalled for a little while, but it's well and truly back on the agenda now, and so the Sheep Meats Council of Australia, or now Sheep Producers, has commissioned the work, and our role recently has been to just review the work where it was up to and review what the industry's position might be, and that involves a whole list of possible implications of changing the definition. So what I want to run through tonight is just go over what the Australian definition is currently. I want to look at just what the proposed change to the definition would be, and then talk about several of the most obvious implications of what that change to the definition would be if it were to be implemented. Now, obviously, the implementation of such a change involves a number of interested parties, whether it be producer representation, but also representation from processing and retailers through the Australian Meat Industry Council. So, it is a process, and the stage in which the process is up to at present is there's been an agreed definition to be contemplated, and that definition is up for a public consultation process, and I will give you a lot more detail about that public consultation process at the end, but essentially what's happening is Sheep Meats Council, or now Sheep Producers, is seeking input from the industry into the possible benefits and or costs of making such a change. So just to get us started, I want to just talk about two definitions. However, through this process, we reviewed as many definitions as we could find globally, particularly pertinent to the markets we have for Australian lamb export markets. So the Australian definition of lamb is that a lamb means meat derived from a female castrated male or entire male sheep that shows no evidence of eruption of permanent incisor teeth. So essentially what we're saying is in Australia, neither of the first two permanent incisor teeth can have erupted. At that point of eruption is the point at which that animal, that carcass, would be downgraded from lamb to effectively mutton. By contrast, in New Zealand, for instance, lamb means a sheep less than 12 months of age, or one which does not have any permanent incisor teeth in wear. So that's a subtle difference, but I have to emphasise that in that definition, a sheep less than 12 months of age or which does not have any permanent incisor teeth in wear. And this is something that's been clarified in this round of talks on the definition of lamb, is that initially the thinking was that the New Zealand definition allowed one tooth to be in wear but not two, but quite clearly that's not the case. It can't have any teeth in wear in New Zealand. And around the world globally, the definitions, regulatory definitions for lamb vary a little bit. In the EU, for instance, there's reference to age. However, dentition, as per Australia, is used to determine the age. In other countries, there is no real reference to age and or dentition. So from a regulatory point of view, the definitions are not as, I guess, hard and fast as we have in Australia or New Zealand. So, a lamb is not a lamb, depending on where that lamb is processed and depending on which country we are talking about. There are subtle differences as to what constitutes lamb. The proposed definition change that we're contemplating is that we would move to a definition of lamb in Australia that basically comes into line with New Zealand. So lamb would mean meat derived from a female castrated male or entire male ovine animal that has no permanent incisor tooth in wear. So none of those first two teeth could be, they could have erupted, but neither of them could be in wear. And that in wear component of that definition really means, it's not fully erupted to the point where when the animal eats, the top edge of that tooth is being used in the chewing process. So what we're talking about is bringing the definition of lamb into line or harmonising it, if you like, with the New Zealand definition of lamb. In terms of implications, the most obvious one is that is an older animal, and so in sheep, in lambs, the first permanent incisor teeth erupt somewhere between 12 and 15 months of age. So there's quite a wide variation in when the first two permanent incisor teeth erupt, but the average is at about 14 months of age. And so right around the world where countries have reference to age, as they do in New Zealand in their definition, almost unanimously, if it's not dentition that they use to check that age, it is ossification, but it's predominantly dentition. And so even though there's a reference to age, the definitions right around the world allow animals older than 12 months of age, because it is an animal slightly older than 12 months of age when it cuts its teeth. That variation in when those teeth erupt is determined by genotype. Some breeds have their teeth erupt earlier than others, and also it seems to be able to be influenced by nutrition. So, one study has shown that undernutrition of the animal delays the eruption of teeth, but there's probably a lot more work around that could be done. So we know that the animals on average the teeth erupt at around 14 months of age. There was some work done as part of the sheep meat eating quality work that was published by Sarah Weiss et al. In 2005, where in the process of doing the eating quality work, they looked at or determined the period of time taken for the full eruption of the first permanent incisor teeth. And the reason they were doing that is that they were looking at animals, comparing the eating quality of animals just before they cut their teeth to animals that were in the process of teeth eruption and teeth erupting to be fully in wear, and animals where both teeth had erupted and were in wear. And so those three groups of animals were determined by running a single mob of sheep up to slaughter, and then choosing the slaughter date when there are approximately equal numbers in each three of those categories. And they did that across a range of genotypes and a range of production systems to arrive at this eating quality work. So in the process of doing that, they determined that the period of time taken from the eruption of the first tooth to having two teeth in wear is 27 days on average. And again, there's wide variation, but on average it's 27 days. So this new definition will allow animals somewhere between 0 and 27 days older to be classified as lamb, because the new definition only allows teeth to have erupted, but neither of the first two permanent incisor teeth to be in wear. We know that it's going to be less than 27 days. We can't say exactly how many days. And so the reason we know is that the first two permanent incisor teeth rarely erupt together. So one tooth comes through, and then some days later another tooth comes through. So really we're only talking about the time taken for the first tooth that erupts through to get into wear. And it's likely then that it's, probably somewhere less than half that 27 days. So we're probably, it's likely we're talking about maybe 10 to 14 days, but we don't know. There's no studies to confirm that. And that would be on average again. So quite obviously there's going to be significant variation around that. So that's what the age implication is. If this change in definition goes through, then we're talking about allowing animals, to be slightly older, a matter of days older, that would still be classified as lamb under this new definition, and these same animals would not be classified as lamb under the existing definition. In 2008, when we did the review, we did some survey work to determine just what percentage of lambs would be affected by these changes. And essentially what we, on the back of those survey works with producers, we determined that there was very few crossbred lambs, and I mean specialist breeders of prime lamb, that would breed lambs and have those lambs at risk from teeth eruption. So when we surveyed producers, the most common response was, no, this isn't going to be an issue for us. Our lambs are gone well before that period of time where they would otherwise have their teeth erupting. Breeders who thought that there was some risk predominantly sold the lambs to finishers to mitigate the risk. So essentially they were looking at their lambs and saying, well, these lambs are getting older, my season won't allow me to finish them, I'm going to on-sell these lambs to a specialist finisher. That's in the specialist crossbred lamb systems. However, about 20% of crossbred lambs and a larger proportion, approximately 50% of merino lambs that were destined to be slaughtered as lambs were going through specialist finishing systems at the time, and some of those were at risk, obviously, of cutting teeth or having teeth erupt, and the at-risk category was determined by how many of those lambs going into specialist finishing systems were going to be at any stage greater than 13 months of age in that system. And again, once we went through the full process of, well, how many lambs end up in there, and then of those lambs, how many end up at risk, and then of those lambs at risk, how many actually do cut their teeth, it was determined that it was only a small percentage held by specialist finishers that actually cut their teeth before sale. However, it had to be noted in that process of that survey work that as for the breeders, the finishers were also saying that the cliff face pricing between lamb and mutton was a significant deterrent to taking on that risk, and therefore both the breeders and the finishers were guarding against it by selling lambs as the risk mounted. So they might look at the lambs and say, well, they're not quite ready, they're not quite meeting my target market specifications, but age tells me that these lambs should go, and or we've mouthed the mob and find a lamb that's cut its tooth. That's an indicator that the rest of the mob might be having teeth erupt, therefore we'll rush this lot off to sale. And so even though only a small percentage of lambs were found to be at risk or having actually cut their teeth, what we also found was that cliff face pricing between lamb and mutton was a significant deterrent to producers or finishers taking on that risk. So that eating quality work was going on around that time from 2005, 2008. Sarah Weiss et al. Published their findings, which was essentially that lambs slaughtered to MSA standards in the slaughter process just prior to teeth eruption had no significant difference in eating quality as lambs did for which the teeth eruption process had begun, but before both teeth were fully erupted. So the actual teeth eruption process wasn't changing eating quality, and that small difference in age of those animals wasn't changing eating quality significantly. There was no significant difference in eating quality. So with the work done, we can say that at that point and over that period of time, which this definition allows the change, we have no knowledge of any eating quality differences. This is not saying that a lamb at 14 months of age doesn't eat differently to one that's 6 months of age. That's not the question that we're debating. It's just the change in definition allowing a lamb 10 days older and having the teeth eruption process started. Does that change the eating quality difference in lamb? And that's the bit where we're saying no, there's no evidence found to suggest that would happen. There's ongoing work at talking about young lamb versus older lamb and whether there's differences in eating quality, and that might lead to changes in the future. But that specific issue is not the one that's not been discussed as part of this discussion. So, to the best of our knowledge, with the work that's been done, the science that's been done, this change in definition wouldn't change the eating quality of lambs that are near that point at which the change in definition would matter. Can these changes be effectively regulated? Well, approximately 85% of lambs slaughtered in Australia are under AusMeat accreditation, in that they're in AusMeat accredited plants and they're under the AusMeat audit system. AusMeat also, and the AusMeat enforces our current definition of lamb in those plants. So where a plant is AusMeat accredited, AusMeat runs the audit system to enforce compliance. There's obviously then 15% of lambs slaughtered that aren't in AusMeat systems, and they're in domestic plants that are under state-based controls, and they're not as uniform across the country. So, but AusMeat, obviously, audits and controls the regulatory landscape in the majority of lamb that's slaughtered. AusMeat also provide the audit service to the New Zealand Quota Compliance Verification Standard, and so that is essentially New Zealand's system to ensure that the lambs going for export meet their compliance requirements. So we know that there's audit systems that can be implemented to regulate this change in definition. Examples of how the in-wear definition might be determined might be that a tooth is in wear when, if you close the mouth of the sheep, the bottom permanent incisor touches the top pad, and that might be a point at which it would be declared in wear. Or it could be that where the permanent incisor is above the height of the lamb's teeth, either side of those first two permanent incisor teeth. So if you put a ruler through on the level of the lamb's teeth either side of the permanent incisors, if one of those permanent incisors is above that level, then that could be another point at which you would determine that that lamb has a tooth in wear. So there are measurable points at which this new definition could be determined as what is in wear. So in terms of the audit processes and how many lambs are inspected and as part of the process, then that wouldn't necessarily have to be changed. So there would need to be some investment from the industry in changing the definition. There's going to be obviously cost in training and things to go on, but at the end of the day, it is with an auditable process if it was changed. Part of the review was to look at market access implications of a change in the definition, and the most obvious outcome of doing that is that New Zealand, with their definition, for which it's proposed that the change moves to the harmonisation with the New Zealand definition, New Zealand has access to all markets that Australia has access to currently. So there seems little risk that Australia might be shut out of a market because of changing its definition when the definition harmonises with New Zealand and New Zealand has access to all those markets. So that there seems to be very little risk there. As I mentioned earlier, age is a reference point in some market definitions, but dentition or ossification are the means by which, where they are enforced, those definitions are enforced. So even like New Zealand or EU, where age is mentioned, dentition is still the primary means of enforcing the age from a regulatory point of view. There are non-regulatory or market-driven specifications applied to the age of animals within the lamb category, and they seem to be driven by either cultural or customer preferences. So, for instance, the Middle East is used to a smaller lamb, so when larger lambs and presumably older lambs get presented to that market, there's market resistance there, saying, well, hang on, lambs should be small. What are these lambs? Even though they mightn't have a formal definition to which that is regulated, there's this customer feedback that says, well, that can't be lamb because it's not the size that we'd expect from a lamb. Our lambs are smaller. So there's that sort of non-regulatory issue going on in the market. And there's also, for instance, domestic markets that would say, well, we won't change our buying specifications, which largely are targeting lambs at 6 months, sucker lambs, 6 months of age. And so, there is market forces for those markets where they want a younger animal. There are, within even the regulatory environment, there are market-driven forces that enable them to choose what lamb they want and what age they want that lamb. So that happens all around the world, and that's not likely to be affected by the changes that are being proposed. Likely changes to production systems of lamb. Given the 2008 survey work and given the additional time we're talking about, that the new definition, or the definition that's been proposed, would allow, it's unlikely breeder production systems will change. If most, particularly in specialist prime lamb businesses, most production systems are geared to suit a seasonal pattern of supply, or within the crop livestock interface, they're chosen to fit within a certain seasonal period, and so going out to a much older animal is unlikely in those systems. Changing things like lambing dates because of this is unlikely in these systems, because the days of which we're adding to the animal's life in terms of the definition is so small. So it seems unlikely that production system at the breeding end would change. What this change in definition does allow, that's recognised, is that you would now have a physical sign immediately before the point at which that animal will move from being lamb to mutton. There'll be a physical sign available, whereas at the moment, waiting for that first tooth to erupt, there is no physical sign. So one day it's a lamb, the next day it's mutton, but there's no, and that's why producers and finishers have this risk-adverse attitude to going anywhere near that age limit. If the definition's changed, then conceivably you go in, mouthed animals, find a lamb for which a tooth has erupted, and you have a short period of time to then take that animal and get it to the market. Therefore, conceivably it allows those finishing systems to take lambs on, knowing that there's a mechanism by which they can control the marketing of them towards the end, and therefore go on with more confidence. And that, in the review process, that seems to be the one point at which people see the most benefit of a change coming, would be that it would allow specialist finishing systems to take those lambs that were otherwise considered at risk, and they wouldn't want to take the risk with, take them on with confidence under a better feed regime right to the point of slaughter. Having said that, there's still going to be a wide variation in when teeth erupt, somewhere between 12 and 15 months. So finishers are going to need to be mindful of, when considering the time frame over which lambs are to be finished. And so finishers are still going to have to be mindful, when they're buying their lambs, they're going to have to be mindful of how long it takes them to finish those lambs, because this definition won't allow them significantly more time. It just allows them to go to that period of time with confidence. So where's the process up to? The process is up to the point where, through the Sheep Meat Council, or now sheep producers, there's been, and AMIC, there's been a lot of discussion, there's been a lot of background work and research into the implications of a proposed change. There's agreement as to what that proposed change would be, and that is this definition that I mentioned earlier, no teeth in wear. So a lamb can have any of its first two teeth erupted, but neither of them can be in wear. So that's agreed. And so there's a public consultation process going now, which is drawing to a close. So next Wednesday, the 29th, is the end of that process. If you want to contribute to that process, get onto the Sheep Meat Council website. The link is provided on this slide. Get on there. You'll see on that page access to a survey that can be completed. If you want to provide a detailed submission, you can send that to me at the email address given to you on this slide. If you, putting forth your views on the changes and the pros and cons of those changes. So it is imminent, though, the close of that public consultation process. It's next Wednesday. So if you want to get on and be part of that process, then you know the time is approaching fast where you need to get on and act urgently to be part of that. So this slide will be available to be downloaded again if you haven't had the chance to write it down or need it. Alternatively, you could contact me. I can direct you there to the website, and also I can take those submissions directly. So the public consultation process will close next Wednesday. Then the results of that will be collated. It'll go through Sheep Producers Australia to the board meeting, and then there'll be a final report due out in March next year, which takes into consideration all the submissions out of that public consultation process. So that's where it's up to. That's the background, the main implications of it that have been discussed and found to date. I should say there's also a copy of the eating quality work on the website. There's a copy of the Holmes Sackett report, a full copy of the Holmes Sackett report on the website as well. So there's a lot more information there if you want to go to that website. Any questions?
Great, that was excellent. Thank you, Sandy. Just might jump in here before we take a look at any of the questions. So that was a great look into the proposed changes and how it will affect the producers. I suppose there's still a few questions, and especially coming in now about the variations in what would be implemented going forward. So thanks everyone for tuning in. We've had a bit over 60 attendees tonight, which is a great turnout. Just to give Sandy a bit more of a break, he's offered to stay online and go through a quick few questions. But however, if you're pressed for time and if you got everything that you needed out of tonight's webinar, you're more than welcome to quit out of the webinar. However, as you do, there will be a survey that pops up. If you could take a few moments to put your thoughts into that survey so we can provide some feedback to Sandy, so he can get an idea of what the audience through sort of his presentation tonight, and we'll also provide this feedback to MLA so they can gauge the effectiveness of their extension activity. So there's a few questions rolling in, Sandy. The first came from Tony in WA a bit earlier on. So he wants to query the 27 days post full eruption versus the evidence of eruption that would be more than 27 days, wouldn't it, particularly if they erupt on different days?
You're right. So that 27 days comes from the work I mentioned in that paper, and it took into account the fact that neither tooth, so it's not that 27 days was the average, and it's not the time taken for one tooth to erupt, it's the time taken for both teeth to erupt to the point where they're in wear. And so it does take into account the fact that they don't erupt together necessarily. One tooth typically erupts before the other. But Tony's right to point out that there'll be significant variation around that. There will be. So there'll be lambs where those teeth have erupted almost together and erupt well under that period of time, and there'll be others where one might have erupted and be up, but the second one has not erupted and is not fully up. However, under the new definition, we're talking about either one of those first teeth having erupted and either one of them being in wear, fully up. So it's likely to be less than 27 days on that basis, and it's likely to be significantly less, but there's no specific work on how long it takes for one tooth from eruption to being in wear. Yeah,
great. So Tony says thank you for that summary and answer to the query. That's excellent. So Rob would like to know, is ossification, the use of ossification as a definition on the table?
It was considered back in 2008, and it's been looked at in other work over time. Essentially, what's been found is that ossification is a far less reliable predictor of age than dentition. So, in the work that's been done, it's basically saying ossification gives us a wider variation in age than dentition does, and therefore it was ruled out as being the means by which the definition would be taken.
So on from that, Charles would like to know, would a change in this lamb definition follow through to the broader sheep market and apply to hoggets versus mutton, i.e. when a hogget cuts their 4 teeth and becomes mutton?
Well, it hasn't been discussed, or certainly I haven't been part of the discussions. So to the best of my knowledge, no, it wouldn't. It's not specifically being taken through, but be aware that really there is no hogget, formal hogget definition. So we really only have lamb and mutton. Hogget is not a formally defined sheep meat category, to the best of my knowledge anyway. So as far as I know, it's either lamb or it's mutton. Hogget, there is no formal hogget definition.
An anonymous question. If this goes ahead, Sandy, what time frame is expected until it's implemented?
I can't answer that. I don't know.
Yep. And Bruce would like to know, this is an interesting question. Do you know, Sandy, at what point did eating quality change significantly in the study?
Sorry, Hillary, you were cutting in and out in that, and I missed the question.
Sorry about that. So Bruce would like to know, at what point did eating quality change significantly?
Well, as a hogget, there were significant changes found. So between 2 and 4 teeth, and I'm not quite sure exactly what age it was, but somewhere between full eruption of the first 2 and the eruption of the 3rd and 4th tooth. David Pethick published work there and showed that it based that period basically on, not on all cuts, but on leg cuts particularly, doubled the consumer dissatisfaction risk. So from about this point of age, 14 months onwards, we're running significant risk with deterioration in eating quality.
Thanks, Sandy. Stuart says, hi Sandy, can you provide any feedback to the impact on average lamb carcass weights?
Look, I think as an industry, I think it'll have very little impact, because I think the proportion of lambs that this will impact is small by, when you consider it in context of the whole industry. So for the industry as a whole, I think very little, because as I said, my reading of this is that, most people won't change their production systems. At that specialist finishing point in the industry, which affects, a smaller proportion of the lambs, and for those for which are facing specific risk in terms of their age, then I think it will impact average carcass weights significantly, because the way I think it'll impact is that I think people taking lambs onto feed where the perception of the risk is heightened, i.e. by a lamb finding a lamb with a tooth erupted, or just by knowing the age of the lambs. The current temptation at the moment is that you just get those lambs to market, because the cost of missing the timing and getting the timing wrong is far higher than the cost of them being under specification or not having, the finish you would want on those lambs. So I think at that end of the industry, it'll be significant, but I think we're talking about a small proportion of the lambs slaughtered in context of the whole industry.
How about in merino production systems? Sandy, Ollie would like to know this, as it would allow 2 springs to be utilised and more wool growth.
Yeah, well, effectively, we can we can get 2 springs on lambs now, because again, remember, we're only changing the age at that extreme end by, days. It's not, well, we think days. We don't, it's not weeks, and certainly not months. So I think, again, I don't think it will change. I think we could use those 2 springs now. I don't think this changes that. So again, I'm not anticipating producers would change a lot about their specifications. The only thing they'll change perhaps is that going forward with more confidence into that second spring, maybe right till the end of it now, otherwise, rather than bailing out halfway because we know they're approaching the age at which they might cut their teeth.
So Bruce would like to know, following on from that, will the few extra lambs that you can keep on over the winter affect the price?
Look, hard to know. Again, my inclination is not substantially, because I'm thinking it's not a large proportion of the lambs slaughtered that we're talking about, so therefore not a large difference in price. But I guess we can't know for sure until the end, but I think no.
Okay, that seems to be the end of the questions, unless there are any more for Sandy. I'll just wait a few more moments just to see if any more come through. But if you're heading off, please don't forget to fill out the survey. It'll only take a few moments. Yeah, so that seems to be about it for tonight, Sandy. If you have anything else to add.
No, Hillary, just if people want to get in and be part of that public consultation process, remember where that website is, and remember that that needs to happen within the week.
Well, there was one last question that came through, sorry, Sandy, from Bindi. Great presentation on this issue. Did you look at the increased confidence in the supply chain?
No, we've talked to the whole supply chain on this issue, and again, there was, it's fair to say there was mixed reaction along that supply chain, but I don't think that once understood what the implications are, and once understood about how much older these lambs could be, I think most people are accepting of the that the risk is a manageable risk.
Great. All right, everyone. I think that will conclude our webinar for tonight. David will be in touch with you when the next one is going to be held. Thank you again, Sandy, for presenting us with your presentation tonight, and we'll see you all next time.
Thank you, Hillary.
Bye.